Coming up on Primetime News, with Korea's ruling party continuing to tussle over the fate of its embattled floor leader, Yoo Seong-min says he has nothing to say about calls for him to go. Korean exports drop for the sixth straight month in June with more gloomy export data. The government and the ruling party agreed to draw up a multi-billion-dollar stimulus package. Plus, with his country defaulting on its IMF debt, Greece's prime minister reportedly concedes to the country's creditors, saying Athens is ready to accept the bailout conditions it previously rejected. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Wednesday, July 1st. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with our first story.
The ruling Saenuri Party's internal feud over the fate of its floor leader Yoo Seong-min has intensified even further.
While politicians loyal to President Park are stepping up the pressure on Yoo to resign,
others are defending the floor leader and urging him to focus on the job at hand. Our Park Ji-won starts us off.
Senior lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party who are close to President Park Geun-hye have set an internal deadline for the embattled floor leader's resignation. They argue that Yoo Seong-min should resign by next Monday to take responsibility for creating a rift between the ruling party and the presidential office. That's when lawmakers are slated to vote again on a controversial revision to the National Assembly law that was vetoed by President last week.
You keep saying that he doesn't have any reason to resign. I don't know why he doesn't step down. The current rift between the party and the presidential office is reason enough for him to resign.
But the party is deeply divided over the issue. Five-term lawmaker and Supreme Council member Lee Jae-ho said the party should not make a political scapegoat of Yoo.
We might have some time to discuss this matter after getting through all of the most pressing state affairs. But now is not the time for this. The public doesn't want a fight between the ruling party and the presidential office. I think it should stop now.
Despite the mounting pressure on him to resign, the floor leader has continued on with his regular schedule. He also refused to comment on the matter when questioned by reporters.
I have nothing to say about the matter.
The chair of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, Moon Jae-in, criticized the ruling party, saying it has to obey to the will of the public, not that of the president. The party said it would continue to seek ways to strengthen the assembly's legislative power, even though the ruling party has said its lawmakers will not vote on the vetoed bill next Monday. The proposed revision to the parliamentary law that sparked the standoff between the Assembly and the presidential office allows the parliament to request changes to executive ordinances that are out of step with the spirit of the related law. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has called for South Korea to reopen dialogue with North Korea while maintaining a firm security posture amid threats from the North. At a ceremony to appoint new members of the National Unification Advisory Council, she said Seoul is ready to discuss anything and that it's time the leadership in Pyongyang come to the negotiating table to find the best ways for the two Koreas to coexist. While urging the North to give up its nuclear development program, President Park said South Korea is prepared to assist the regime if it does forego its nuclear arms. Let's listen to what she said.
북한이 핵을 포기하는 결단을 내린다면 경제와 평화, 체제 안정과 경제 발전 모두를 얻을 수 있습니다. 우리 정부는 북한의 핵 포기 과정에서 함께 추진할 수 있는 다양한 경제협력 사업을 강구하고 있습니다.
Stressing that South Korea will need to end 70 years of division in order to further its position in the world, the president asked the council to lead her government's efforts to prepare for a peaceful unification. Now, a state-run think tank report once again shows the dismal human rights violations in North Korea. The Korea Institute for National Unification says 1,382 people were publicly executed between 2000 and 2014 in the north. That's based on the testimony of around 1,400 North Korean defectors, and the actual number of executions may be higher. In particular, a number of executions were carried out after the people were caught watching DVDs of South Korean dramas or films. This report goes against Pyongyang's claims to the United Nations last January that executions were used for exceptional cases only.
Let's turn our eyes back to South Korea. The prosecution is reported to have concluded allegations that deceased businessman Song Wan-jung provided illegal funds during the previous presidential election and lobbied for a pardon are groundless. While the prosecution is expected to announce its findings on Thursday, media reports say prosecutors couldn't find evidence that slush funds from Song's Gyeongnam Enterprises were delivered to political camps during the 2012 presidential race. They also failed to prove that Song provided money and valuables to politicians and key figures within the presidential office for his pardon in late 2007. A list of current and former political heavyweights left by Song before his apparent suicide in April prompted the prosecution's special probe and forced former Prime Minister Lee Wan-gu to step down. Prosecutors, meanwhile, are expected to indict Lee and Gyeongsangnam-do Province Governor Hong Jun-pyo for accepting bribes from Song.
A bus carrying 26 Koreans plunged off a bridge on Wednesday in the Chinese city of Jiangxi province. The Korean consulate in the Chinese city of Shenyang says at least 10 people are dead, while some 20 others are injured. Local authorities are currently investigating to find the main cause of the accident and the extent of damages. Included among the victims are said to be Korean trainees at the local government officials development institute who were participating in a 5-day training program until Friday. Moving on to the latest on the MERS outbreak here in Korea, the tide seems to have turned in Korea's fight against the virus, with no additional cases reported since Saturday. And there's growing speculation the government might declare an end to the outbreak later this month. Our Kim Han-bin has this report.
The outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome seems to be under control in Korea. Korea's health ministry said Wednesday that no new cases have been reported for 4 days since Saturday, indicating that the outbreak could be subsiding. The number of people diagnosed with the virus has been the same since Saturday, at 182, and with no additional deaths reported overnight. The death toll remains at 33. Of the 182 people diagnosed with the disease since the outbreak on May 20th, 2 more have been discharged from the hospital, bringing the total number of fully recovered patients to 97. While 52 are still hospitalized, there are still roughly 2,500 people in isolation, mostly at home for suspected infections. Still, many of them are being released daily. The virus carried a high fatality rate in other countries of 40% until the outbreak in Korea. South Korea's fatality rate stands at 18.1%. There is no vaccine or cure for the disease. Kim Han-bin, Arirang News.
Shifting gears now, for the first time ever, a Korean candidate has been elected to head the International Maritime Organization. The newly appointed Secretary General says he plans to expand Korea's role in that realm. Our Son Jang-in tells us more about Im Gi-taek and his decades-long career in the industry.
The decision was made after a 5th round of voting at the International Maritime Organization's headquarters in London. Im Gi-taek, currently president of the Busan Port Authority in Korea, was elected as the next Secretary General of the UN body responsible for improving maritime safety around the world. He beat out 5 other candidates from Denmark, Cyprus, Russia, Kenya, and the Philippines. Im said he will try and foster healthy growth in the marine industry while building up Korea's global reputation in the field.
I'll do my job as a middleman so that Korea and the world can work together on maritime policies.
Im is no stranger to the organization. He started attending IMO meetings as part of Korean delegations from 1986, actively participating in maritime safety and environmental protection issues. A graduate in nautical science, he also served a 3-year tenure as Korea's deputy permanent representative to the body from 2006. He is the first Korean to head a United Nations agency since former Director General of the World Health Organization Lee Jong-uk served his term between 2003 and 2006. Im will assume his 4-year post from January 1st next year, replacing the incumbent Secretary General Koji Sekimizu from Japan. The decision of the Council will be submitted to the IMO Assembly in November for final approval. 손정인, Arirang News.
Exports are the engine driving Korea's economic growth, but they're losing steam, marking a drop every single month this year. With uncertainties lingering over the economy, there isn't a great deal of optimism heading into the second half of the year either. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
Korea's outbound shipments fell for the 6th straight month in June. According to the Trade Ministry, exports came to almost $47 billion, down 1.8% from a year ago. Imports fell 13.6% over the same period to about $37 billion. The country posted a record trade surplus of about $10 billion, extending its consecutive surplus run to 41 months. However, what's noteworthy is that the June figures are an improvement from May, when exports slumped nearly 11% on year.
The pace of decline slowed down from last month on the back of the release of new mobile communication devices and automobiles. This increased exports to ASEAN nations. Shipments to the U.S. also grew, as that country is also registering relatively positive economic conditions.
The experts cited the weak Japanese yen and euro as downside risks that could affect Korea's exports in the months to come. Exports have been going downhill this year due to low global oil prices and the weak Japanese currency, which has eroded Korea's price competitiveness on the international market. Looking at the report card for the first half of the year as a whole, outbound shipments slumped 5% on year, while imports fell over 15%. The trade surplus in turn hit an all-time high on a half-year basis.
Although it's too soon to say whether Korea's exports will start to pick up in the second half, experts say that stimulus measures in Europe, as well as an overall improvement in global economic conditions, including a slight rise in global oil prices, will lift exports to a certain extent. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And in the face of such sluggish export data, as well as the MERS outbreak and a nationwide drought that's put a significant dent in consumption, the government and the ruling Saenuri Party have agreed to draw up an extra budget worth around $13 billion to prop up growth. The two sides aim to submit the supplementary budget plan to the National Assembly for approval by Monday, with the goal of seeing it pass by July 20th. They also plan to inject all of the extra money by the end of this year.
Round one has gone to Samsung in its closely watched legal skirmish with U.S. hedge fund Elliotts Associates. A local court has thrown out Elliotts' injunction request to block a vote on the merger of two Samsung Group affiliates. But according to our Yoo Seong-min, though a battle is won, the war is far from over, as the merger is still not a done deal yet.
The Seoul Central District Court has rejected the first injunction brought by U.S. hedge fund Elliotts Associates. Elliott had been seeking to block the proposed $8 billion merger of two Samsung Group units, Samsung C&T and Jail Industries, the de facto holding company of Samsung Group. The hedge fund, which owns a 7.1% stake in Samsung C&T, sought to block a shareholder vote scheduled on July 17th over the proposed all-stock takeover attempt by Jail. Elliott argued that the proposed merger is unfair, saying stockholders in Samsung C&T were getting offered well under the odds for their shares. Elliott, Samsung C&T's third largest shareholder, also took issue with Samsung C&T's stake sale to KCC, a local manufacturer heavily in favor of the takeover, and was hoping to nullify KCC's voting rights. The Seoul court did not issue a decision on that injunction request on Wednesday, but said it would do so before the shareholder vote on July 17th. On the first injunction, the court said the merger ratio could not be seen as unjust, as it complied with local law which requires the ratio to be calculated based on current share prices. Following the ruling, Elliott expressed its regret, sticking to its guns that the sale of Samsung C&T shares to KCC was inappropriate and unlawful. Samsung C&T says it was delighted with this court's ruling, describing it as fair as the merger itself. The proposed merger, considered vital for the controlling Lee family to transfer leadership from the group's hospitalized figurehead Lee Gun-hee to eldest son Chae-yong, will go through if 2/3 of Samsung C&T shareholders vote in favor of it. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Cost efficiency beats interoperability as South Korea picks Airbus over Boeing for airborne tankers. Our Connie Kim sheds light on how the debut of the European aerospace giant's refuel tanker in the country will boost the Korean Air Force's combat capabilities.
It's the world's largest aerial refueling tanker. The Airbus's A330 MRTT is about 59 meters long and roughly 60 meters wide, and it can carry up to 111 tons of fuel, giving F-15K fighter jets that are deployed to South Korea more time in the air. Currently, the jets have only 30 minutes to travel the 320 kilometers from Daegu Air Base in the south to the easternmost island of Dokdo on a full tank, and 20 minutes to fly over the southernmost island of Yeodo. This short amount of time wasn't enough to allow the Air Force to respond effectively if conflict were to break out in these areas. Japan has long tried to claim Dokdo, while the Yeodo Reef is in the air zones of Korea, Japan, and China. But now with the new tankers, the flight duration will be extended to more than 90 minutes over Dokdo and about 80 minutes over Yeodo. In addition, the Air Force will be able to push its range of operations to beyond Pyongyang and Wonsan in North Korea. The Air Force's combat capabilities will also get a boost as the jets will be able to carry more weapons while using less fuel. 3 companies had competed to win the $1.3 billion bid, with Airbus and Boeing in a tight race at the top. Although Boeing's KC-46A is highly compatible with the US-made fighter jets in South Korea's fleet, the European aerospace giant ultimately won the bid. In announcing its choice on Tuesday, Seoul said the deciding factor was Airbus's higher refueling capacity. The 4 tankers are slated to arrive in South Korea between 2018 and 2019. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Time for the top international headlines around the world. Let's connect to our Kwon So-wa at the News Center.
So let's begin with a major development in the Greek debt crisis. The Greek Prime Minister has signaled he may be willing to accept terms on a bailout package.
That's right. Within the last few hours, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has submitted a new bailout deal proposal. He is expected to address the country in a televised speech to explain a letter that he reportedly sent to the EU, European Central Bank, and IMF, which asks for, quote, a new agreement that regulates the country's financing issues through the European Stability Mechanism, or ESM, to ensure debt sustainability by focusing on growth. While Athens was expected to hold a referendum on Sunday that asks the Greek people whether they agree with the bailout terms laid out by the country's creditors, there's now growing belief it might not happen.
There are also reports that the referendum would be cancelled. All of this is no basis to have serious negotiations, and Greece has to make clear first what it wants.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has addressed the German parliament, saying the fallout from the Greek default is not an insurmountable problem. She also said she looks towards a new culture of stability in Europe, saying the continent is in a better state than it was 5 years ago. Now, 2 crucial meetings are scheduled for later on this Wednesday to discuss aid for Greece. In one of them, officials from the European Central Bank will decide on the possibility of granting an emergency loan to Greece, and another will take place among Eurozone finance ministers to discuss Athens' latest proposal for a third bailout. Greece officially defaulted on its $1.7 billion payment to the IMF Tuesday local time, becoming the first developed nation to miss a loan payment to the financial agency. The United States is set to announce it has reached an agreement with Cuba to reopen embassies in each other's capital for the first time in more than half a century. But the normalization of diplomatic relations is expected to take some time since the two sides still have a number of issues to settle. Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
U.S. President Barack Obama is set to announce on Wednesday that the United States and Cuba will reopen embassies in their respective countries. Citing a senior official, the Associated Press reported Tuesday that Obama will make the announcement at the White House at 11 a.m. local time. A similar announcement is likely to be made by the Cuban government. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will travel to Havana later this month for a flag-raising ceremony to reopen the American embassy. The historic step between the longtime foes follows a December 17th announcement that they would move to restore relations. This was followed by a summit between Obama and his Cuban counterpart Raul Castro in Panama in April. And since then, the two sides have been negotiating the re-establishment of embassies in Havana and Washington. The U.S. cut off diplomatic relations with Cuba in 1961 after Fidel Castro's revolution. But while the opening of embassies marks a milestone in improving U.S.-Cuba relations, problems remain. They include talks on human rights and possible cooperation on law enforcement, including the touchy subject of U.S. fugitives sheltering in the Cuban capital. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And on to other news, the deadline for a nuclear deal with Iran has been extended until July 7th. Officials from the 5 major powers locked in talks with Tehran believe the extension will allow more time to figure out a long-term solution to Iran's nuclear ambitions. The issues still awaiting to be resolved include the clarification and monitoring of Iran's nuclear program, as well as the timing and phases of sanctions relief.
Delaying the implementation of the deal is not in any country's best interest. It puts the limitations and restrictions on Iran's nuclear program further down the road, as well as the sanctions relief that Iran wants.
The extension was granted as Tehran is thought to have met a key condition, namely the significant reduction of its stocks of enriched uranium that could be used for nuclear weapons. That said, there is a limited time to resolve all the issues, as July 9th is the deadline when the deal must pass U.S. Congress. And these are the international news we're following at this hour, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.
In June, most parts of the country were suffering from serious drought except the eastern regions, and we only had an average of 62% of precipitation, and the average seasonal temperature was also slightly higher. So the monsoon season is more than welcome this year, but the rain will take a break this week and into the weekend, and the weather condition is forecast to remain hot and mostly sunny with an increase in humidity, prompting the discomfort index to rise. And for tomorrow, plenty of sunshine will lead to high to very high UV levels across the nation, pushing the daytime highs to further up, and Daegu seems to be the hottest region, hitting 32 tomorrow afternoon. And as for the other parts of the nation, it seems like Seoul and Daegu will see a high of 28 and 32, while Gwangju and Busan peak at 29 and 27 respectively. And as for the other parts, Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 28 and 26, and Dokdo rises to 25. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And we've come to the end of our newscast. This has been Daniel Chan. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Hwang Jae. Please join us at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.